Welcome back. It's about 22 minutes to go before the top of 7 o'clock. We're still continuing our conversations this morning, taking a look at exactly what's happening in and around your world. And of course, CMS family, this is where we delve into current affairs headlines this week, from the coalition antics in the city of Johannesburg to developments with government's response to the warrant of arrest for Russian President Vladimir Putin. How that will pan out, remains to be determined. So let's discuss this right now with TMS resident analyst Jamie Mighti. Jamie, always a pleasure speaking to you. A very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I think that there's a lot that's been happening especially when it comes to the city of Johannesburg, hasn't it? Another day, another no mayor, and yesterday, I think by late yesterday, we kind of had the sentiment in the field that we were going to have ANC candidate from Al Jamaa, Kabelo Kwamanda, who has actually been nominated to take up the post. But it looks as though there have been so many caucus breaks that even when we wake up on a Wednesday, the city of Johannesburg does not have a mayor.
Yeah, another week goes by without a mayor.
Yeah.
And I think it's disappointing for all of the residents of Johannesburg that this is happening. And that's number one, that when you have commotion at the leadership level, certain delivery doesn't happen. And if you drive through the CBD and you drive through parts of Johannesburg, you can see the effects of that. It may not be as visible in the affluent areas, but as you go greater into the city, you can see that there is a need for decisive leadership and there's a gap. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we can all see is that coalitions right now are not working because there's a lack of emotional intelligence and there's a lack of diplomacy. These are critical things that need to happen when you are governing an institution as big as the city of Johannesburg. What we have right now is a lot of egos in the room, people who cannot actually make deals, because for deals to be made, you need compromise, you need maturity, and one could be forgiven to be describing the behavior we are seeing as childish behavior at a level where people are concerned about their lives and people are actually now moving their assets out of the city of Johannesburg to Cape Town and sometimes even out of the country. This affects the credibility of the city, it affects the stability of the city, and that's why you need to have political maturity guiding this particular process. But I don't think that right now we can say that we've seen political maturity from any of the entities that are involved in this fiasco.
You know what the problem is that it's not just an account of local government. Every time something happens within our local governance structures, it's almost a foreshadow of what's to happen after 2024. Now, already the existing polls are pointing that the African National Congress will get less than a 50%. In fact, some are even saying as low as a 46%, which means that whether we like it or not, there will have to be negotiations regarding who do I go into coalition with. And if we can't get it right in the metros, and they are struggling, what more hope do we have at getting it right at a national level? 2024, whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. I tell you one thing, Jamie, I don't want to wake up every second month not knowing who my president is.
Nobody does. And if you look at what happened in Israel, they had 5 elections in 4 years because the coalitions kept breaking down. So they couldn't sustain a prime ministership for a term of office. And that's a worst case scenario of coalitions, right? If we have that, considering all of the other economic conditions that are affecting South Africa, I think that will just be a debacle that will affect not only the rand, the credibility of the country, but also growth, because international investors are not going to want to come into a political environment which is so uncertain. So if you look at a country like Israel, which is one of the top 20 economies and relatively stable economically, maybe people will tolerate some of that. But imagine if you have a rotating chair or a musical chairs of leadership at a presidential level because coalitions are not working next year. So I think what is required now is for all citizens to start raising their voice about their concerns about how these coalitions are being managed, specifically to the leaders of these political parties, to say, cut it out now. We're providing you guys with funding. We are the voters. We are the people who expect a certain quality of leadership from all of you, but we're not seeing that right now. And we cannot afford to put a country which is already fragile, with a fragile economy, high inflation, high unemployment, into this position in 2024. Sort out your business.
Well, let's talk a little bit also about one such a Rome statute. Are we in the ICC? Are we out of the ICC? Where do we sit? And because if the citizens themselves do not know, it's simply because there's been such a disconnect with what has been delivered from either the African National Congress through their Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, who was lamenting the words of the president at the time during the state visit by the Finnish Prime Minister, and of course uttering the words that we need to consider getting out of The Hague, almost to say. Now, when we're looking at matters right now, what does not change is that the ICC has issued a warrant of arrest for Russian President Vladimir Putin. What also stands is that we've got the BRICS summit that is coming up in August. And of course, South Africa is at a point right now where it's trying to negotiate, including sending a special envoy to the United States to try to explain to the US government why is it that we cannot participate in having a head of state arrested upon the visit. What's your take on that? I mean, there have been so many developments around that, and even for a special envoy to go to the United States to explain themselves, I have to ask who's in charge here.
Yeah, so I think what's happening at one level is diplomacy.
Yeah.
South Africa has been giving mixed messages on this to specifically accelerate the diplomatic processes of negotiation, which need to happen here. You can't give a clear, definitive answer whilst you're still trying to send or communicate in the global community about concerns that you have, right? So there is confusion, and that confusion is as a result of South Africa being put in a very hard position, because what we have now with this particular case is a clash of history, a clash of law, and a clash of politics. The legal question is relatively simple, right? You've got a country that is a signatory to the statute. You've got a president who's going to visit, and there's an interdict on that particular individual.
Yeah.
There's a small debate that will still need to be resolved by the court, because there's an article, I think it's Article 98 of the Rome Statute, which does provide under international common law immunity to sitting heads of state. So there is a legitimate legal question about should that be upheld, and should governments actually provide immunity to heads of state. So that's a legal question. The historical question goes back to the League of Nations. The League of Nations became ineffective and disrespected at particular points in its history when it couldn't effect particular decisions, and America was out, a variety of things, and then it had to be dissolved, right? And then the United Nations came in. Now that history now comes into play when you look at how the ICC has operated, because historically they've really focused a lot of their attention on countries like Kenya, Sudan, Uganda, right? And now they're expanding to Russia, but in the middle of a conflict geopolitically between Russia and other Western nations, right?
For example, you get to ask yourself, why is it that when America invaded Iraq, why was nothing instituted from the ICC, right? When we're talking about Libyan president at the time, Muammar Gaddafi, why is it that nothing was done about the United States as well? So it seems as though it is targeting, and you have to ask yourself, who is the target? And who are those people that are immune from adhering to the statutes of the Rome Statute?
And that's the clash.
Yeah.
And that's the clash. So the legal question is easier than the historical and legitimacy question, because if you have a rule of international law which only targets countries that are opponents of the West, eventually that international framework loses credibility and more people opt out, because now that's why you're starting to hear countries saying we may actually just leave this international order because it's too much of a headache and it's biased. And that's where you start to have the complications that South Africa has been put into, because South Africa is a member of BRICS. They did extend an invite to Putin, and the invite was accepted, right? And in the interview that was done with the ambassador, he was saying that as far as he knows, Putin will be attending the conference. So South Africa now being put into this hot potato where they have to take a side and advance certain interests which may be viewed as being Western interests being pursued through legal warfare. That is something that it becomes very difficult for South Africa to do against an ally country such as Russia, which has been part of the liberation struggle and supported liberation movements and trained people and still has strong relationships. Then comes the geopolitical question. Right now, the world is decoupling. We are seeing the tension between China and America. We are seeing the debates around microchips, the banning of particular companies. TikTok, they're considering
a more nationalistic perspective and an outlook when it comes to certain countries.
Now, why must South Africa, this African country which is facing its own internal challenges, be the one that is forced to take a position that is so determinative of its own fate, but this big geopolitical issue. Because, you know, if elephants are fighting, you don't want to be the soccer pitch where that is happening. And that's kind of what the global community is doing. So as much as it's a difficult debate, I think it's okay for South Africa right now to be pursuing all of its options, because they've put South Africa in an untenable position.
Well, of course, on the other side of it, it's BRICS, right? The BRICS summit in itself. Let's talk a little bit about some of the outcomes from BRICS. I mean, what's been very interesting to note is how many other countries are saying, we raise our hand up, we also want to be part of the BRICS countries. And that speaks significantly to that geopolitical tussle that is currently happening between the West and maybe developed nations as well as developing nations. And you cannot compete with the numbers. And some of these countries that are putting up their hands to be part of it have got the numbers where population is concerned, and more than anything else are trying to forge a way ahead without the control of the West. It still sits as this big brother, this hegemonic kind of a structure that says to other developing countries, you will do what we say. It sounds a little bit about like colonialism, if you ask me.
It is to a certain extent a form of neo-colonialism. And even the French President Macron gave a speech saying that Europe needs to be independent of America. We cannot be the little brother to America's agenda. So where things sit right now, people are re-examining the global order. They're saying the petrodollar is too powerful. The US dollar as a reserve currency makes us vulnerable to being controlled through soft power measures by America. Some of those criticisms are fair, and some of this geopolitical stuff that is unfolding now will continue to unfold throughout our lifetimes. There seems to be, let's call it a lukewarm war, not a cold war, but not a violent war at this particular moment. So to then go to an African country and say, no, we're going to squeeze you until you take one particular side, and that side that you take must be a side that benefits us, while you are not necessarily giving all of the support to the people of that country. It's a very, very difficult position to put South Africa in, and I think that's why you're seeing this mixed bag of messages. It's not by accident that right now the message is not resolved, because we're still right now just in April, right? May, come into May, and there still is space for the global community to try to find each other through diplomatic
Jamie, you know what we're going
channels.
to do when we come back from the break? We'll expand a little bit further on about what kind of solutions and options are available to the South African government ahead of August. Of course, that breaks